Picture this, an island in the southern Caribbean Sea, 60 kilometers long, so small that you could drive from one end to the other in under an hour. Colorful buildings that look painted by hand, streets that smell like salt and citrus, water so blue it looks digital, a population of just 150,000 people. That is smaller than Tempe, Arizona, smaller than Pasadena, California, smaller than most mid-sized European cities. No professional football league, no world-class academy system, no history at the biggest tournament on Earth. And yet, this summer, they are going to the FIFA World Cup 2026. Not as hosts, not as a wild card, not through luck. They earned it. My name is, and this is Unknown Football, the channel that goes beyond the scoreboard and tells the stories that nobody else is telling. And today, we are telling the story of Curaçao, the smallest nation in the history of the FIFA World Cup. But here is the thing most people watching this right now don't know. Curaçao's secret weapon has nothing to do with what happens on the island itself. It has everything to do with a football system thousands of miles away in Europe. A system that produced Johan Cruyff, Ruud Gullit, Frank Rijkaard, Arjen Robben, Virgil van Dijk, the Netherlands. And in a few minutes, I'm going to explain exactly how a tiny Caribbean island hijacked one of the greatest football development systems in the world and used it to qualify for the biggest tournament on Earth. But first, when the 2026 World Cup kicks off this June across the United States, Canada and Mexico, with 48 teams for the very first time ever, 4 nations will be making their World Cup debut: Cape Verde, Jordan, Uzbekistan, and Curaçao. But Curaçao is different from all 3, because no nation this small has ever qualified for a World Cup. Not once. In 96 years of FIFA World Cup history. Think about that for a second. 96 years. Hundreds of tournaments. Thousands of qualifying matches played across every continent on Earth. And no country with a population this small has ever made it. Until now. So, how did they do it? How does a tiny Caribbean island with no professional league compete against nations with millions of players, massive budgets, and decades of World Cup experience? Stay with me, because this story gets better and better. And the Dutch connection at the heart of it is something that will genuinely surprise you. Now let me take you somewhere. Close your eyes for a second. Imagine an island in the southern Caribbean Sea, just 40 miles off the coast of Venezuela. Colorful buildings painted in every shade you can imagine: pink, yellow, blue, orange, lining a deep natural harbor that has welcomed traders and travelers for 500 years. Streets that smell like salt and spices. Markets full of fresh fish and local produce. A sky that looks painted. That is Willemstad, the capital of Curaçao, a UNESCO World Heritage Site on an island that most people couldn't find on a map. Now, here is the first thing you need to understand about Curaçao. This island has been a crossroads of cultures for centuries. The Arawak people were the first to call it home. Then the Spanish arrived in 1499. And when the Dutch took over in 1634, they turned this tiny island into one of the most important trading hubs in the entire Western Hemisphere. Dutch merchants, African communities, Portuguese Jewish families escaping persecution in Europe, Latin American traders, Caribbean fishermen. They all passed through Curaçao. They all left something behind. Which is why today, this island of 150,000 people speaks 4 official languages: Dutch, English, Spanish, and Papiamento, a unique Creole language that mixes Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, and African dialects into something that exists nowhere else on Earth. 4 languages, 150,000 people, one tiny island. And here is where it gets interesting for football. Because that same spirit of mixing cultures, of taking the best from everywhere and making it your own, is exactly how Curaçao built their national football team. Now, one of our viewers left us a comment that I want to share with you, because it is one of the most insightful things anyone has written about this story. They said, and I'm paraphrasing, that most of the players in Curaçao's squad were trained in the same Dutch football academies as Netherlands players. That Curaçao is part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and that there are hundreds of talented players with Dutch Caribbean roots who are technically good enough to play at the highest level, but who will never get a chance to represent the Netherlands because the Dutch squad is simply too strong. And that representing Curaçao gives those players the opportunity they would never otherwise have. That comment is 100% correct. And it tells you everything about why this World Cup qualification is so extraordinary. The core of Curaçao's squad consists of players born and raised in the Netherlands. Almost every talented teenager from the island moves to the Netherlands, which ultimately strengthens the national team but leaves local football with very little impact. Think about what that means. These players grew up in Dutch cities: Amsterdam, Rotterdam, The Hague. They went to Dutch schools. They trained at Dutch academies. They absorbed the Dutch football philosophy, the pressing, the positioning, the technical quality, from the age of 8 or 9 years old. And you can see it in the way Curaçao plays. Unlike many Caribbean nations who look to soak up pressure and hit on the counter, Curaçao wants to keep the ball, play with possession, and create goals with long passing moves. Their style is a direct reflection of the Dutch football education their players received. This is not Caribbean football. This is Dutch football, with a Caribbean soul. And the connection goes back much further than most people realize. In 1946, the Curaçao national team traveled to the Netherlands and played 9 matches against Dutch club teams. One of those matches was against Feyenoord, in a stadium filled with over 37,000 spectators. Almost as many people as the entire population of Curaçao at that time. 37,000 people in Rotterdam, watching a team from a Caribbean island they had probably never visited. The bond between Curaçao and Dutch football was not created in 2010 when the island gained autonomous status. It was forged 80 years ago. And here is the key detail that makes this whole story click. Many of Curaçao's best players were good enough to play for the Netherlands national team at youth level. But the Netherlands squad is so deep, so consistently stacked with world-class talent, that being the 3rd or 4th best player in your position means you might never get a senior cap. So these players made a choice: represent the Netherlands and possibly never play a senior international match. Or represent Curaçao, the island their families came from, the place that shaped their identity, and actually compete on the biggest stages in football. For most of them, it was not even a difficult decision. As one Curaçao player said about the choice, "Every guy in Holland wants to play for the Dutch team. I was close to being there, but now I'm proud to be part of this journey." Proud to be part of this journey. That is not the language of a player who settled for second best. That is the language of a player who found something more meaningful than football statistics, an identity, a community, a flag worth fighting for. And this summer, In Houston and Kansas City and Philadelphia, 150,000 people back home on that colorful little island are going to watch their players carry that flag onto the biggest stage in sport. But before we get there, we need to talk about the qualifying campaign. Because what Curaçao did to get to this World Cup was not a lucky run. It was a masterclass. Stay with me. So, how did they actually do it? Let me introduce you to a man named Dick Advocaat, 78 years old, Dutch, one of the most experienced managers in the history of European football. He has managed the Netherlands national team, PSV Eindhoven, Rangers in Scotland, Zenit St. Petersburg, where he won the UEFA Cup, Belgium, South Korea at a World Cup, Russia. A man who has coached at the highest level on 4 different continents. And when Curaçao called, he said yes. Advocaat himself said, qualifying the smallest country in the world for a World Cup was one of the highlights of a managerial career spanning nearly 4 decades. Not the UEFA Cup, not the Scottish title with Rangers. This, a tiny Korean island, 150,000 people, their first ever World Cup. That tells you everything about what this achievement means. Now, the qualifying campaign itself was extraordinary. Curaçao began in the second round of CONCACAF qualifying. 4 matches, 4 wins. Barbados 4-1, Aruba 2-0, St. Lucia 4-0, Haiti 5-1 away from home. Haiti 5-1 away. That result alone sent a message to the entire Caribbean football world. Then came the final round, the stage where World Cup qualification was actually on the line. And Curaçao were outstanding. They beat Jamaica 2-0 at home, beat Bermuda 3-2, then travelled to Bermuda for the away leg and won 7-0. 7-0 away from home in a World Cup qualifying match. A nation of 150,000 people sending a message that they were not here by accident. And then November 18th, 2025, Kingston, Jamaica, the final match day. Curaçao needed just 1 point to make history. 1 point against a Jamaica side managed by former England boss Steve McClaren, who needed to win. And here is the detail that makes this story almost impossibly dramatic. Dick Advocaat was not even at the stadium. He missed the match for personal reasons. His assistant took charge on the touchline. The most important match in Curaçao's history without their manager. And then, in injury time, Jamaica won a penalty. The entire island watching from bars and living rooms and street corners, holding their breath. The penalty was overturned by VAR. The final whistle blew. 0-0. And Curaçao, the smallest nation in the history of the FIFA World Cup, had done it. 10 qualifying matches, 7 wins, 3 draws, 0 defeats. Unbeaten from start to finish. And in a cafe in Rotterdam, where Curaçao fans had gathered to watch, the scenes were unlike anything Dutch Caribbean communities had experienced in living memory. Because that is the other beautiful detail about this story. The celebration was not just in Willemstad. It was in Amsterdam, in Rotterdam, in The Hague. Wherever Caribbean Dutch communities exist across the Netherlands, people who grew up between 2 worlds, 2 cultures, 2 identities, celebrated together. Their island, their flag, their World Cup. Stay with me, because in the final part of the story, we talk about what comes next. Germany, Ecuador, Ivory Coast, and Curaçao. So, the draw. December 5th, 2025. The Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. Curaçao's name came out of the pot, Group E. And their opponents? Germany, Ecuador, Ivory Coast. Let's be honest, on paper, this is brutal. Germany, four-time World Cup champions, one of the most decorated football nations in history. Ecuador, a physical South American side with World Cup experience and players from top European leagues. Ivory Coast, African giants, technically gifted, physically imposing. And Curaçao, 150,000 people, their very first World Cup match ever? June 14th, NRG Stadium, Houston, Texas, against Germany. At 78 years old, Dick Advocaat will become the oldest manager in the history of the FIFA World Cup, breaking the record set by Otto Rehhagel when he led Greece at 71 in 2010. The oldest manager in World Cup history, leading the smallest nation in World Cup history, against Germany. Now, most people look at this group and say it is over before it starts. But here is what I want you to think about. Nobody gave Curaçao a chance in qualifying either. Nobody thought a nation of 150,000 people could go unbeaten through an entire CONCACAF qualifying campaign. 10 matches, 7 wins, 3 draws, 0 losses. Nobody thought they would beat Haiti 5-1 away. Nobody thought they would win 7-0 in Bermuda, but they did. And here is something worth remembering about this squad specifically. These are not amateur players who happened to qualify by luck. This is European quality football powered by Caribbean identity. Players trained in Dutch academies. Players who compete in professional leagues across Europe every single week. A team that Advocaat himself compared to a solid, mid-level European side. Against Germany, yes, it will be hard. Against Ecuador and Ivory Coast, do not write Curaçao off. Because the pitch does not care about population size. The pitch does not care about history or budget or what anyone expects. And for the children of Curaçao watching this summer, the kids growing up on that colourful Caribbean island who have never seen their country at a World Cup, this tournament means something that no statistic can measure. Before this qualification, if a child in Willemstad dreamed of playing in a World Cup, they had to dream about wearing someone else's colours. Brazil, Netherlands, Argentina. But now they can dream about wearing blue and yellow. Now they can dream about running out in Houston, in Kansas City, in Philadelphia, representing 150,000 people who waited 96 years for this moment. Welcome to the World Cup, Curaçao. You have absolutely earned it. Now, I want to hear from you. Can Curaçao get a result against Ecuador or Ivory Coast? Do they have any chance of making the round of 32? Drop your prediction in the comments right now. I read every single one. And if you want more stories like this one, stories about the nations and players that nobody else is covering, subscribe to Unknown Football. Because next up, Italy. 4-time World Cup champions, and the most embarrassing story in the history of the tournament. They missed out. Again. This is Unknown Football. See you in the next one.